Yisro. Yeah. If you're following in our book, it's on 394. Of course, you don't have to follow it all, but you're welcome to. PARSHA Yisro is the PARSHA of Jethro, the only PARSHA in the entire Torah named after somebody who, in and of himself, is not part of the Jewish people. We see later, perhaps he becomes, but it tells us, it says the following. Here is this most important PARSHA that we have in the Torah. It's the PARSHA where the Torah is given. It's the place where you finally find man and God touch. Right? They get together. Man, right? Moshe goes up the mountain, God gives him the Torah. And this is the PARSHA that we named for Yisro. And we have to wonder why we don't just call this the PARSHA of the Torah, the PARSHA of the giving of the Torah, PARSHA of such a significant thing. Why do you name it for Moshe's father-in-law? So, okay, it begins with a sentence about him, but you can still name it whatever you want. So there's number of extraordinary things about Yisro that makes it worthwhile that we're doing this. Let's start with one right in the beginning. Vayishma Yisro. It says Yisro heard. And then it tells you who he is. Kohen Midian, he was the priest of Midian. Chosen Moshe, he was Moshe's father-in-law. Then it goes back to say what he heard. Eskal asher asa Elokim leMoshe v'Yisrael amo. Everything that God did for Moshe and the Jewish people, ki hotzei Hashem es Yisrael miMitzrayim, because he took the Jews out of Egypt. So Yisro heard this, and everything that God did in the story of taking the Jews out of Egypt. Right? That's how it begins. So what? Right? And what do I care? He heard. We have a famous medrash that says, when the Red Sea split, every body of water in the world split. Even the water in your bathtub, the water in your teacup. Now, I would say that if that was the case, literally, those are probably bigger miracles than the sea splitting. If you're sitting in Vancouver when the Torah was given, right, and the water in your teacup split, I'd say that would be pretty miraculous. Now, the fact is, I don't believe that the Medrash is to be taken literal. I think what the Medrash is saying is that the story of the splitting of the Red Sea and the Jews coming out of Egypt was such an amazing story that everyone in the world heard about it. And therefore, it's as if the water in your own house split. This is because you'd say back then, it's not like they had internet or newspapers. How did they hear if something happened right outside of Egypt? How did they hear about it in Europe? How did they hear about it in Asia? How did they hear about it at all? Right? So it says it was so significant a thing that everybody heard about it. That people all over the world said, you won't believe it. Here, what happened here, that this God came and took the Hebrews and made them Jews, took them out of Egypt. So that's such an amazing thing that everyone heard. So when it says here, Yishma Yisro, Yisro heard, so big deal. Everybody heard, right? So what makes it so special? The Torah said, tell us that Yisro heard. Everybody did. So Rashi is bothered by that. And Rashi begins, the first one here, it says, Vayishma Yisro, Yisro heard. So Rashi says, Ma shmu ashma v'ba. What did Yisro hear that he heard and he came? Kriyas Yamsu from Milchamas Amalek. He heard about the splitting of the Red Sea and the war with Amalek. So, really hidden in the words of Rashi is the answer to the question. Not simply. And it's not even in the answer, it's in the question that Rashi asks. The answer is, Yisro heard. And I ask you, so what? Everybody heard. So Rashi says, Ma shmo ashma, what did he hear? Vaba, and he came. The answer is, he heard the news that God took the Jews out of Egypt, and he went to do something about it. He came. He said, if this is how the world is supposed to be, if the God comes and saves the Jews, and this is true, then I want to be a part of it. He didn't just hear it. In general, when people hear things, there's only a few things that can happen. First thing is you hear something and you don't even notice it. It doesn't mean anything to you. You open up the newspaper and there's a war going on in some island in the Southeast Pacific. You don't know anything about it. It doesn't mean anything to you. You turn the page, right? That's one. Another one is you read about it and you see, this is a horrible story. How can something like that happen? And then you turn the page. The third one is that it bothers you because you hear about it and you get up and do something. You do something about it. You don't just hear about it. That's what Yisro did. Yisro understood that you hear something, you act on it. Don't just say that's very nice. And when you know that hearing something, it brings across an emotional response, you have to act on it right away. If you don't, it goes away. They tell a story about the Chafetz Chaim, and that one day that his assistant was going through the mail, and he opens up an envelope, and there's an envelope with 500 rubles inside of it. I don't know what that is, but it's a lot of money for that era, for those people. It was significant money. However, their mail was like our mail, which means if you put an envelope with cash in the mail, you've got a pretty good chance it'll be delivered, but there's not a terribly small percentage or chance that the money will disappear because it's cash going through the mail. There's no way anybody is going to be able to be accountable for it. This guy sent, let's say he sent $1,000 in cash through the mail as a donation to the yeshiva. So the assistant goes to the Chafetz Chaim and says, look what I found. Chafetz Chaim says, there's something wrong here. It's not normal. If a person is going to send us money, he'll get a check, or he'll bring it in cash, but he's not going to mail it to us because it's a lot of money. So there's got to be something wrong with this story. So he said, you can't use that money until you find out. So he goes and investigates, and he all the way back to the person who sent the money, and he asked him what the story is, and he said, this is what happened. He said that on a certain day, I was approached to do a business deal with someone. And I said to God, you make this business deal go through, and I make the money that this guy says I'll make, I'll give 500 rubles to the Chafetz Chaim's yeshiva. And it went through, and he got the money that day. So he says, well, the post office is already closed. I can't go buy a money order. But he said, and he said, so I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll send him the money tomorrow. As it starts getting later in the day, right after the post office is closed, of course, the guy says, what do I got to send 500 rubles? I'll send 50 rubles. 50 rubles is a lot of money, right? Instead of sending him $1,000, I'm sending him $200, right? So $200 for nothing I'm sending him. That's not insignificant. So he says, you know what? I'm not going to send him 500. I'm going to send him 50. And then he realizes, what am I doing? I promised God that if you do this, I'll give 500 rubles. He took 500 rubles, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, wrote the name of the yeshiva, and mailed it. And he said, and he told the guy who came to him, why did I do it? He said, because if I had waited, I would have ended up sending you 5 rubles. I would have allowed the emotion of the moment when I went to God and said, God, make this deal happen, and I will give $500 to charity. And God did it. And now I'm saying, well, maybe I only have to give $50 to charity, not $500 to charity. $50 also not a significant amount of money. And then the next day it would say, he would say to himself, you know what? They don't even know the money's coming. I'll send them $5. What do they need $500 for? I'll give them $5. And then everybody's happy. They get $5 they weren't expecting. He says, because what happens is the emotion fades. It goes away. So if on that purpose, the person loses their emotion, right, nothing comes of it. The Torah is telling you here that was what's special about Yisro. Yisro took to heart what he heard, and he was intellectually honest, and he said, I'm going to do it. He went and he saw, wait a minute, God split the Red Sea? God is giving the Torah? God took the Jews out of Egypt? It must be true. It's happened right in front of our eyes. It must be that there's a God, and the God of the Hebrews is the real God, and I'm going to go be a part of it. So Rashi says, what did he hear? He heard and he came. That's the answer. He heard about what God did, and he did something about it. And that's an important message for us, to understand that when we are inspired, to allow ourselves to act on the inspiration. If we don't act on the inspiration will fade, and we won't do anything. So he's saying this. Now, Yisro was an extraordinary person. He was not your regular kind of guy. He was the person who found his own way to God. And what did he do? It says here he was the priest of Midian. And what it was is that Yisro decided that he was going to find God. He was going to find truth. And how he's going to do it is he's going to investigate every religion in the world and find out which one's true. So he would try this one, he would try this one, he would try this one, until finally he got to Judaism, and he came to the conclusion it was true. and he went to do it. Right? But he found it through a process of elimination. Right? Now, you'll see that this concept goes through everything with Yisro, as what kind of person he was. He was a person who fought for truth, but he was a very critical person. Because you have to be a critical person to look at all these religions and decide what's wrong with them. So that's who he was. That was his personality. He was such a person. There's a famous medrash about Yisro that we should talk about. The medrash says that when Moshe came to marry Yisro's daughter, Yisro said, "I'll be glad to let you marry my daughter on one condition. You're going to have 2 sons. I want one of them for me, and you can keep one." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "One of them is going to come and worship idols with me." He's the Kohen of Midian. He's not Jewish. And the other one you can keep. Whenever I marry my daughter, you give me one, you get one. One of them is going to worship idols, one of them will worship God. What do you say? So it says that Moshe agrees. And he agrees. And that the older son, the firstborn son, is going to go with Yithro. Now, it sounds crazy. How could a guy like Moshe, who sees God face to face, who talks to God, who knows more than anyone in the world that there is a God, right, and what that God expects of us, is prepared to give his firstborn son to become an idol worshiper, when he knows it's not true? It's not even his parents were Jewish, so he's Jewish. He knows that Judaism is correct. How does he allow that to happen? So the Medrash commentaries explain that what's really happening here is that Yisro is arguing with Moshe. What is the best way for a person to become close to God? Moshe says the way it is you raise your children that they should only be exposed to good things, to positive things, to other Jews, to people who are following the Torah, to a life of Torah. Don't expose them to the outside world, to people with different values. Only with this way. That's the only way. Is it good? Well, the person like that can excel. They can do amazing things because they're already starting out at a high place. On the other hand, they also could be, sheltered to the point where they might not even be able to live a normal life. You shelter a person, you put them up in a city where everybody is the same, everybody believes the same, acts the same. Right? It has its pluses, but it definitely has its minuses because that's not normal. It's not normal that we have such places, right? Yisro wanted the argument that he had with Moshe was that Yisro believed the best way for a person to become a sound, understanding Jew is to investigate everything around you until you know that Judaism is true. Like, do you know Judaism is true and let's say Christianity is not? Do we know that? Or do we just believe it? Because we happen to be Jewish. If we happen to be Christian, we'd be good Christians. The fact is that Yisro is saying that's not how you do it. Yisro says, Christianity's around? Try it out. Does it work? Okay, you found your answer. It doesn't work? Try Islam. That doesn't work? Try Judaism. Right? His idea was you try every philosophy, right? And then when you find that whatever philosophy works, that's the one you follow, and only one will work in the end. So that's what Yisro's belief was. Moshe was no. You shelter your child, you raise your child 100% according to Torah, and then let him go out and make his life. But he already knows it's true because I went through it. Moshe says, I went through it. So now my son knows it's true. He doesn't need to be exposed to all the negativity of the world. And Yisro says he has to be exposed to it in order to choose correctly. This was the argument between the two of them. So Yisro says, you want to marry my daughter? I want the firstborn. That is, I want the firstborn son to follow my approach to finding God, which is by trying everything. You want that they should be sheltered and live their own life and be separate from anything negative in the world? Then you raise that one. And let's see which one does the best. Right? Who comes out the best? That's the argument between Moshe and Yisro. Because Yisro was adamant that his way was the right way. Right? And Moshe was adamant his way was the right way. And then from here we see that both of them have a point.
I'd still say, because I'm Jewish, I want my children to be Jewish. Let him try being Jewish first. If he doesn't like that, then let him try something else.
Well, but you see, that's
in retrospect,
it's a different because you're also already Jewish.
Yeah.
In this case, this is before the
Jewish.
Torah is given,
Wasn't Jewish
right?
yet.
It hasn't happened yet. So then it says, "Vayikach Yisro chosen Moshe," and Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, took as Tzipora Eshes Moshe, Acho Shalochel. He took his daughter Tzipora, who was the wife of Moshe, after Moshe sent her away. V'yesh Shnei Baneha, and her two sons, Asher Shema Echad Gershom. She had with her two sons. The first one's name was Gershom, because Ger Hayisiv Eretz Nachriya, because I was a stranger in a strange land. V'Shem HaEchad, and the name of the other one, Eliezer. His name was Eliezer. Ki Elohei Avi v'Ezri v'Atzilenu Mecherev Paro, because my father and my God saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. So each one of them had these names. We know their names already. Right? The Torah tells you their names usually when somebody's born. That's when you tell them names. You don't wait until later in their life to tell us their name. So why is the Torah telling us their names here? What's the purpose? You also notice there's a very strange grammatical, let's say, inconsistency here. And if you look at it, it says Shem HaEchad Eliezer. The name of one is Eliezer. Ki Elokei Avi v'Ezri, because God saved me. God and my father saved me. Right? So that's why it's his name. V'Atzilenu Mecherev Paro, and I was saved from Pharaoh. But then it says V'Shem HaEchad. It says V'Shem HaEchad Eliezer. And then it says V'Shem HaEchad Gershom. You got two. So how is it? That's not how you talk, right? You know, I have two children here. The number one's name is Joe, and number one's name is Sam. It's not what number one and number one is. His name is Joe. He's the older one. His name is Sam. You don't say this one's name is Joe. This one's name is Sam, saying that as if they both are the same person. It's a funny way of writing it. You have the one and the other one, right? So first is that they're telling us something here. What is happening? Yisro was coming to the giving of the Torah. Moshe had no intention to bring his wife and children to the giving of the Torah. It's an odd thing, you'd think. Moshe would want his children there. He'd want his wife there when God gives the Torah. But they weren't planning to bring them. Yisro shows up with the wife and the children because Moshe sent them away. And Yisro is telling Moshe an important thing. He's saying, Moshe, you're about to start your job. You're the leader of a nation. You're not just a rabbi of a shul, not just of a community. You are the rabbi of the entire Jewish world, right? And that's going to be a lot of work. So I'm coming to tell you something. The name of your older son and the name of your younger son. Because you know what happens to people who get these big jobs? They end up forgetting their family. Right? The Gemara tells a story about a fellow who was he got very wealthy, and he made a commitment that he was going to donate money to the community. So he saw that when people would walk to come to the temple on pilgrimage, they'd walk from all over Israel, they'd walk there, they'd get thirsty. So he went and he dug wells at his own expense all over Israel, so that when people walked to Jerusalem, they could have something to drink. Right? It's a nice thing to do. The Gemara concludes by saying, but his son died of thirst. His son died from not drinking. So, terrible. This guy goes and he gives all of this money and time and effort so people should have a drink and not be thirsty, and his own son dies of thirst. And that what it's really telling you is that he had to put all of his time into his job to try to take care of the Jewish world, right? And he neglected his children, right? He forgot them. So Yisro is coming to Moshe and saying, Moshe, you're about to begin this important job. And everyone knows when you start a job like this, you're going to have millions of people. You're going to have life and death questions. But you go home at night, your kids aren't going to have life and death questions. Your kids are regular kids. You have to make sure you're there for them. You have to spend time with them. You have to care about them. Even though you only have so many hours in the day and you have to take care of 3 million Jews, nevertheless, you got to make sure you take care of your children. They're your children. Right? That's what's very important. That's why it says here that Yisro came with Moshe's sons, and it tells you why their name is their name. Why? Because Moshe, don't think that you should only act for the people. Do you know why you're here today? You yourself, you said it in your kid's name. Because you saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Because I was a stranger in a strange land. You're thanking God for leaving everyone behind and working on you alone, one person. He saved you, right? One person. So you too have to realize you have 2 sons. And you have to take care of the entire Jewish people. But you also have to take care of your 2 sons. That's important. You have to make time for them also. That's why God gave them to you. So you might have a level of work that you have to do in order to appease the world or the country or the nation that you're with. But you also have to deal with your own children. And that's why it says it that way. And it says at the bottom here, V'yetze Moshe l'kros chosno. Moshe went out to greet his father-in-law, v'yishtachavu, and he bowed down to him, v'yasek lo, and he killed him, v'yishalo ish l're'ehu, and each person asked his friend, l'shalom, that they should have peace, v'yavohu ha'ola, and he brought him into his tent. Right? So here we find this important introduction. Right? Yisro says, right, here I'm coming, and I'm bringing your wife and your children. And Moshe goes out to greet him, and he bows down and he kisses him and he asks him how he is, right? By Yisaper Moshe l'chosno, and Moshe speaks to his father-in-law, as kol asher asa Hashem leFaro l'Mitzrayim. He tells him the whole story of what Pharaoh did and what God did to Pharaoh and to Egypt, and how he sent us out. So imagine the scene. Here you have Moshe standing up at the edge of the city, because he was standing at the gateway, the entrance to the city, and in comes Yisro, his father-in-law. So it says Moshe gets up, he goes over to him, right, and he greets him. And then it changes and it tells you, it says, Vayisak lo, and he was kissed, Vayishalo Yisraelu, and each person asked of each other, how's their family and so forth, and then they were brought into the tent. But up until this point, it tells you Moshe did this and Yisro did this. Suddenly, it stops telling you who it is, and it says he kissed him. That's all it says. He kissed him. Who kissed who? The Moshe kissed Yisro. Yisro kissed Moshe. Right? That's the question. Is it has a reason, because proper protocol, proper respect, as a son-in-law kisses his father-in-law. The son-in-law goes out of his way for his father-in-law. His son-in-law has respect for his father-in-law. So Moshe would stand up for his father-in-law. Moshe would go out of his way for his father-in-law. He's supposed to treat him in a certain way, right? So he does that. But so it says, so who's kissing who? Does the father-in-law who's coming to see his son-in-law, who is the greatest leader of the Jewish people, kiss him? Or did the son-in-law kiss the father-in-law? You can't tell from the words, right? It says just he kissed him. The Talmud says, because it uses the word ish here, that each person, that they called him a man, that word ish is used by Moshe when he's referred to later on by God, where he's called ish Elokim, man of God. So it's saying that Moshe is the one who kissed his father-in-law. This shows us that Moshe was prepared, right, to act like a regular person. Moshe wasn't a regular person. Moshe was the most powerful, spiritual, and closest to God of any human being in the history of the world. And nevertheless, right, it's telling us that he had to be humble in front of his father-in-law. He had to build his father-in-law up. His father-in-law wasn't even Jewish. His father-in-law was an idol worshiper, supposedly. And nevertheless, he had to do that. This shows us an important thing. There are times when you're not allowed to go out of your way to give respect to some people because they represent something that's not good. But that's such a small number that in general, we have an obligation to go out of our way to greet and treat people with respect. If they're like us or they're not like us. If they wear a kippah like mine or they don't. They go to my shul or they don't. You have to be nice to the people. You have to treat people with dignity, regardless of these things. Moshe is teaching us that lesson. Even though Moshe was the king, and you'd think that his father-in-law would be secondary to the king. Nevertheless, Moshe felt, he's my father-in-law. I have to give him respect. So it makes no difference if you think I'm the king. This is how I feel. I feel that I have to do it. This shows us how much we have to treat people with dignity, even if it calls for us to not necessarily act within the level of dignity that we expect. Like I do expect that I don't know if somebody's going to invite me over to their home, that they're going to speak to me, right? It makes sense. If they wouldn't speak to me, it would be like being tortured. You bring me to your house and you don't talk to me. There's something wrong with that. So the idea being that the Torah is telling us here is that you have certain protocols. You have derech eretz. You have how do you act with people. You have the regular rules of manners. You have to keep them. They're important. They're a part of what makes you who you are. It's a part of what makes you a good person. And ultimately, it's symbolically a part of being a Jew, is acting in that way. You know what it's like to have a host who's not so outgoing, or a guest who's not so friendly. Interaction with somebody, and they're not as nice as you expect they were going to be. Nevertheless, we think that that's the case, and people act that way. But we have an obligation to not do that, and that's what that tells us there. Okay. I was going to skip a couple of things. I want to get to the next thing. If you remember in the beginning, and we talked about Yisro, it said that Yisro, well, what did he hear? So it says he heard two things, right? And we only talked about one. He talked about this. It says that he heard the splitting of the Red Sea, right? And he heard about the war of Amalek. Now, if you look closely, it doesn't say that he heard about the splitting of the Red Sea, and he heard about how the Jews won the war of Amalek. It says he heard about the splitting of the Red Sea. That's the same. And he heard that they went to war with Amalek. But he didn't hear that they won. Didn't hear that they lost either. They did win, but he didn't hear it. All he heard was that. What's that trying to tell us? I think the Torah is trying to tell us here is that what caused Yisro to come was not just that he wanted to be a part of what he saw. I think that what Yisro also had happen, that he saw two things happen and he couldn't understand it. How is it possible that people could have such a good relationship with God that he would split the Red Sea for them to save their lives, and moments later they would be so antagonistic to God, right, that Amalek would come and go to war with them? The only time Amalek fights with us is when we're disrespectful for God. So how could these same people, who God split the sea for, right, just a few moments later become so arrogant and so difficult that it's possible to have a war with Amalek? If you wanted to say to me that he heard about the splitting of the Red Sea and he heard about how the Jews won Amalek, those were two amazing things, so that would cause him to come. But that's not the idea. The idea was what caused him to come was he was a searcher of truth, and he couldn't understand how is it possible that a person could live through the splitting of the Red Sea, actually experience God opening the sea, letting you walk through, and closing it and drowning everybody who's chasing you. How can that be? And that you have such a story, right, like that, in a case where you have a person who does these, and at the same time, we don't believe in God correctly, that Amalek would come. Why? What makes Amalek come? It says that because we stopped doing mitzvahs, we stopped acting correctly. So Amalek came. Amalek only comes, right, in order to make harm on the Jews when they deserve it. The same people who God split the Red Sea for, a matter of days later, had fallen to the level that there was a war with Amalek. And yeah, they won the war, because they weren't that bad. But that, Yisro said, how was that possible? How could a person have such a wonderful thing be done for them, and the next day totally deny it? How is that possible? How could the Jewish people have the Red Sea split for them, and then a week later deny that there's even a God? How's that possible? That's what he was bothered by. The fact is that we have the same problem. This is a very common problem. I can make it abstract, if you like, and say that it's the cigarette smokers. Do you think there's any cigarette smoker in Canada today that smokes cigarettes and doesn't know that it'll kill him? They all know it. It doesn't say it might kill you. It says it will. Right? It will definitely shorten your life, right? Anybody thinks it's not going to? We all know it, right? So how can we do it? Why do we smoke today? how can a person smoke today and think they'll be okay? But they do. So that guy's going to get it, not me. I'll be fine, right? I'm not going to have this problem. I'm going to live. I'll beat it. Right? That's what people think. It's how drinking. How about drugs? A person takes certain drugs. You take it 3 times, you become an addict. So you take it once, okay, you had a nice time. So you want it again. So you do it again. Now if you do it a 3rd time, you might become an addict. Chances are you will. And the rest of your life will be destroyed. Right? Well, I won't be an addict. I can handle it. I can do one more. Right? I can stop anytime. I don't have to do this. And he does it again. And of course he becomes an addict. Does he think he's really different than everyone else? So in all of these cases, it's like the doctor who's overweight, right? I remember my wife had a doctor who was an obstetrician. He used to smoke. He died of lung cancer, but he used to smoke. You'd say, these are weird things. How are these things possible? That you have someone who teaches you how to diet and they're overweight. How is it that you have somebody who's, let's say, is always getting speeding tickets, but is telling you it's not right to speed? How do you get this? And it's a psychological fact called cognitive dissonance, which means that a person can hear something and not apply it to themselves. I could be a smoker, and you can prove to me that it will kill me, and that I will die younger because of it, and I will still not believe you in my heart of hearts, and not do it. I'll say 100% of people who smoke cigarettes don't die from lung cancer. 100% don't die. Right? 99%? Okay, say 99% of them do. Well, I'm part of the 1%. I'll be fine. That's how people really believe. Right? And that idea, right, is how it's possible for the same people one day to have the sea split for them, and a few days later they deny that there's a God, and a mullet comes to attack them. That shows you how people are. And it's important for us to understand it, because as people are that way, we are that way. And we need to see through it. We have to be intellectually honest with ourselves, and it's not easy to do. So now we get to the story of the Torah itself, bottom of 401 onto 403. If we look on 403, the bottom in line 10, Hashem says to Moshe, "Go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their clothing. Let them be prepared for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day Hashem shall descend in the sight of the people on Sinai. You shall set boundaries," and so forth. So God is now telling Moshe that in order for the Jewish people to get the Torah, they have to be prepared. So you'd think, here's the most spiritual day in the history of the world. God himself is going to come down and hand something to a man. He's going to literally touch men. Right? It's an amazing idea that man and God could have a conversation, that he could touch him. He could be there with him. How is that possible? Right? It's an amazing thing that a person has that ability, that they can do that. So what does the Torah tell us here? People have to be prepared themselves. Well, of course they do. They're going to have this enormous spiritual experience. If they're not prepared for that spiritual experience, they're going to have a problem. But that's not what's going on. They are going to have a spiritual experience. But God tells them, go back home, take a bath, change your clothes, don't have relations, keep yourself physically clean, then come back and give the Torah. That's not what are we talking about? We're not talking about getting a new car. Then we're getting the Torah. Go home and prepare yourself. Fast. Think about spirituality. Think about your relationship with God, and then go and get the Torah. No, it says go home, wash your clothes, have something to eat, prepare yourself, and come to God. Nothing spiritual at all. And the reason is because this is dealing with the physical, not with the spiritual. That God does give the Torah, but he also gives us, in doing so, the rules of how to live, how to act, how are we all the time, right, in our actions. And that's what he's referring to, right, that we have to deal with. On 407, we begin what's known as the 10 Commandments. Now, the expression the 10 Commandments is not a Hebrew expression at all. The 10 Commandments, right, seems to let you think that there are 10 Commandments out of the 613 that are more important. These are very important, right? And that's not really the case. We don't call them the 10 Commandments. Our name for it is the 10 Statements. Aseres Hadibros. Aseres is 10, Hadibros is statements. dibur is to speak. Right? If I would say that the 10 Commandments are 10 mitzvahs, you'd have to say a Sarah mitzvah. But we don't say that. We say 10 Commandments, right, really means something different. And that's the idea is that the 10 Commandments are not more important than the rest of the Torah. They're a part of the Torah. But God gave us a succinct part of the Torah, which you can learn from it the rest of the Torah. You can understand a lot of the fundamental beliefs of the Torah, and therefore He gave it to us separately. But it's really a part of the Torah. In fact, there was a period of time when people, as a part of the prayer service in the morning, they used to recite this section of the giving of the Torah and the 10 Commandments. And then the rabbis came along and said, this is not good. Because people are starting to believe that the 10 Commandments are better than the rest of the Torah. And people are starting to say something like, I keep the 10 Commandments. I might not be religious, but I keep the 10 Commandments. Right? The fact is that no, they don't keep the 10 Commandments. It's extremely difficult to keep the 10 Commandments correctly. Right? It really is. But people say it. Right? The 10 Commandments for us are not commandments. They're statements that God made at a specific time to prepare us for the receiving of the Torah. Yes, they are commandments, and yes, they're part of the Torah, but they're not uniquely separate for that reason. Okay, it goes through what the 10 Commandments are. Interestingly enough, right, there's 2 tablets. Right? The tablets are actually squares. They're not like you see in a synagogue. Those were developed much later to look like a heart. Those are not what the tablets look like. They were perfect squares. They were cubes. And you could read the 10 Commandments on every side, right, frontwards and backwards. It made no difference, even though they were etched into it. Okay? So now we're going to, on 4:13 already, starts talking about getting the Torah. Right? Do not fear, for in order to elevate you has God come, so that aught of Him shall be upon your faces, so you should not sin. The people stood from there afar. Moshe approached with a thick cloud. So shall you say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. You shall not make images of what is with me. On and on, the 10 Commandments. So this idea now is that the Jewish people received the Torah. This is the purpose of the world. It says, back in the story of creation, it says how each day it talks about Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi. When it gets to the 6th day, it adds a word. It's instead of saying day 5, day 6, it says day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and then that says the 6th day. It says Yom HaShishi. The Ha is extra. Yom Chamishi is the 5th day. Yom Revi is the 4th day. It doesn't say Yom HaShishi, Yom HaChamishi. Only on the 6th day does it say that. Right at the end, it uses that expression, the day of the 6th, rather than the day of the 5, the day of the 4. It changes the wording. The Talmud says that hey, that letter hey, Yom HaShishi, instead of saying the 6th day, it is the 6th day. The letter hey that's in there is actually in there for a reason. It's in there to tell you to look at the 5th day of another month. Hey is 5. So what is that month? Sivan. Sivan is when the Torah is given. So it says that God said, you want to get my Torah? Fine. You can have it. You don't? I'm going to destroy the world. Why? Because that same hey and the 6th day is introducing Shabbos. And that's what it's doing. Shabbos is going to begin in the creation story. So it's saying that if the world was created as long as you keep the Torah. If you're not going to keep the Torah, then that little hey will testify that you're not, and it will make it so that the Torah, which is given on the 5th day, on letter hey day, will no longer happen. And therefore, God is saying that it's so significant. You receive the Torah, right? You have it on this special day. That if you don't follow it correctly, then all of creation is a waste. What it's telling us that there are certain things in the history that are so important that everything that happens in the world happens for this reason. The fact that God gave the Torah is so fundamental to our being able to live that we couldn't understand it without it. I mean, if God, what does God want from us? He wants us to lead. He wants us to be change the world. So he has to give us a guidebook. That's the Torah. If he doesn't give us the guidebook, then there's no purpose for the world. So it says, either the Jews will accept the Torah on the 5th day of Sivan, of the month of Sivan. That's what the letter Hey is for in that statement, because it means 5. And if they don't, then I will destroy the world, because there's no more purpose. The purpose of the world is to get the Torah, and the purpose of people is to follow the Torah. That's the idea. If God did not give us the Torah, we couldn't follow it. It would have been over. That would have been the end. So that's why we have it. And then suddenly, we conclude the PARSHA with what seems to be something that has nothing to do with the PARSHA. Right? You think here we're having this very important PARSHA, talking all about all these very important things. That we got the Torah. Moshe goes up on the mountain. He's there for 40 days and 40 nights. God gives him the 10 Commandments. They're a miracle. He smashes the 10 Commandments. You have all of these things going on, right? Then it says, an altar of earth shall you make for me, and you shall slaughter near it your elevation offerings and your peace offerings, your flock and your herd. And when you make for me an altar of stones, do not build them hewn, for you will have raised your sword over them. All right, so what is it telling you? It says in the first line, Mizbeach Adama Taseli. Make make your altar out of dirt, you should make for me. And you should offer these different sacrifices. Right? And then it says, Ve'im hamizbeach avonim taseli, but if you make for me a stone one, then you have these problems. But God is saying that there's an idea of making an altar out of dirt. Right? The point is that it's saying, what if we have to look at ourselves in the same way? We have to look at ourselves as we are saying, a mount of dirt you should make me. Make me feel that I'm like a thing of dirt. What is a thing of dirt? A thing of dirt is nothing. A thing of dirt is dirt. It's the lowest thing that you could be. Nevertheless, what's it used for? It's used for the highest thing, which is offering sacrifices. So that's how we should be. Don't think that because you're important and you're part of the Jewish people and you're going to get the Torah and you're part of the answer to the problems of the world, that you're any better than the rest of the world is. You're like an altar of dirt. You're here to bring the world to spirituality like an altar. But you have to remember, you're made out of dirt. Human beings are made out of dirt. All human beings are made out of dirt. So we're no more special than any other race or people. And therefore, we have to remember, you are like dirt. That is to say, not bad, but don't be arrogant. Don't go around thinking, oh, we're so special, we got the Torah. You're a bunch of non-Jewish lowlives. You're a nobody. It's not true. That's not how the Torah wants us to look at the world. The Torah wants us to partner with the world, to be one with the world. We have our job to lead, and our job to lead requires us sometimes to be single, to be on our own, to eat uniquely, to drink uniquely, to do everything uniquely. That's what we do. But the ultimate thing is that we are here for the people, to help the people. So we need to keep that in mind as to what it is that we're trying to do. And we should make ourselves like dirt. We should feel, who am I to expect something? And I was saying that, we mentioned earlier how we had this, I was very surprised with all of the events that went on for my birthday. I had no idea at all. So people asked me about it. And they asked me, what do you think about all of it? And I thought it was really wonderful, all the effort and money and everything that people did. It was really, I totally didn't expect it. I expect that I like to do things like that for people, and I tried in the shul to do these things for people, and it works. But I've never expected that people are doing it for me. So even though there were many hints that this was going to go on, I didn't pick up on the hints because I didn't think anybody would do that for me, right? Or would make that for me. And then you realize that I realized that an interesting thing is not that I'm so humble that I think that I don't deserve it. I say I do deserve it. I just don't think anybody would do it, right? The fact is, I'm just a regular person like everyone else. And I also have my ego. I don't mind when people say nice things to me, right? I don't expect it. I don't do it for the nice things. I do it because I want to help. I do it because I care about people. But if they do that, it's nice, right? And that's what happened here. Right, I just didn't expect it. Right? I had no expectation. I had no idea, and the whole day was worked out so much that way.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it really was. All right, so we conclude here with at the end, with the end of the story with the giving of the Torah. There's a number, very important things to say in here. I mean, some of them are a little bit abstract. Like, for instance, we know that the Torah was given on Sinai. Sinai is a mountain. Yeah. We don't know exactly where it is. There are some people who claim they do, but the Torah says we don't. And Sinai was one of the lowest mountains in the hills there, in the mountain range. There are many higher mountains, and you'd think that if you want to go on a mountain, and you have to go up a mountain in order to get close to God, and God will come down, you'll go up. You should go to the highest possible mountain you can. But we don't. We go to the lowest possible mountain we can. Of course, no matter how high up we are, God can always reach down and grab us, right? But that's not the point. The point is that we went on this mountain, right, on the lowest possible mountain. That teaches us humility. Here you have a mountain, so to speak. Imagine if the mountain endorphed itself into human feelings. So if you have a mountain, and we go to this mountain to get the Torah, right, and it's the big, beautiful mountain, so that symbolizes, right, how, everything's got to be great and beautiful and big and tall. But if we go out in the desert and we go to this little tiny mountain and say, that's the mountain the Torah is given on, that's humility. That's saying, right, that a person has to realize their place in the world. Just like the mountain. This mountain is not the tallest mountain. It's the shortest mountain. But nevertheless, God picked it because there was something special about it. We're the same way. I'm not necessarily the most, great at everything that I do. But I try, right? So it's the same idea. You're not necessarily always going to be the one that does everything right. There are times when things are not going to go right, and things that can be wrong, and things can be looked at that way. So that the Torah tells us that it was given on the lowest mountain to show you the humility of the mountain, so that you and I, when we receive the Torah in our lives, when we learn Torah, we have to realize that we have to be humble. We can't look down on those people who don't know Torah. We can't look down on people who are our followers, the non-Jews who follow us, rather than on others, right? All of this other religions talk that you find from some people is horrible, right? We're not like that. We're against paganism. We're against attributing God to be an idol. We're against killing human beings and saying it's a religious thing, right? We're against all of that. But we believe in our beliefs. We do believe in God. We have to realize that we're not better than the other people. We have to be humble. We have to realize that those people need to be treated with respect. And the only way we're going to be able to lead someone is to let them know we care and to treat them with respect. And therefore, to make fun of non-Jews, to say things about non-Jews is really wrong. It's against the Torah, because it goes against everything we stand for. That's why it was given on Sinai. Right? That's why it was, because it's humble, it's lower. They wanted to teach us that. Okay? I guess we'll conclude with that. I don't have lots of exciting things for this weekend. Last weekend was exciting enough for a few weeks, right?
Next week.
We had a nice Tu B'Shvat Seder last week, though. Wasn't that nice? The Seder for Tu B'Shvat. That was nice.
I couldn't get here for the evening.
It was too hard?
One earlier on in the week. We go to Down Chalabitz on a Monday, and we had one there on Monday.
Oh, that's nice.
But that we took from the ladies had one last year, and the sisterhood, and there was a Rebbitzin from Israel who was, I don't know if she was here permanently, an Aish Rebbitzin, or whether she was just here. She did a lot with us, and I spoke to Gail, and we organised that, so we celebrated that.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Very good. Yeah, she's a real asset.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's super.
Gershon decided to take the Jewish route.
To not take it.
He did not.
Is that what you're saying?
He did take it.
Okay. Well, there were two brothers. One did and one didn't, right?
One was given to Zipporah's father.
Right. Well, the story I said.
Yes.
Right.
That was Gershon. Right.
Yeah.
Did he remain Jewish?
Yeah. You have from a grandson of Moshe, right? His name was Menashe in the book of Shoftim.
Yes.
He opened up his own temple of idol worship. And it says that he was the result of this deal with Yisro. Even though most of us don't believe that it was literal, that Yisro was going to take him to be an idol worshiper, something happened that caused him to be led astray. Well, one thing you learn from it is that I can't say if Moshe was a good father or a good husband. I have no way of knowing. I mean, we have lots of illustrations in the Torah that might lead us to believe that Moshe's marriage was not necessarily a great marriage. But we can't say for sure. But let us presume that Moshe was a good father. Let's presume. And nevertheless, he had a grandson who became an idol worshiper. And I think it teaches us a lesson, which is that parents can try very hard, right, to lead their children to follow a certain path. And you can be really honest about it. In other words, you're not like trying to get them to do something you don't do, or you're pretending. I'm talking about sincere people who really believe in Torah and want their children to follow it, and they do everything they can, right? They give themselves in every way to get it, and one or two of them don't.
Yeah.
Right? People are people. They're human. They're psychological, not logical. They have their own ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right, that happens. If it could happen to Moshe, it could happen here. We know, like, the Chafetz Chaim, the famous rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim we talk about all the time. He had a son like that too, who stopped being religious. Lived in Chicago.
That's what I say. Never say never. You never say it never happened to me.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what it shows you is that while we have to accept responsibility for our actions, there are some things that are beyond our ability. That a child is just like you have a child, and then God forbid, if it turns out he is a diabetic, right? The world won't fall apart, right? But he's a diabetic. So if you also have a child, and you find out it's a challenge for that child, for whatever reason, just to stay observant, right? It's not your fault. That doesn't mean you don't have to try and do your best, right? And you do.
But it has happened. One becomes orthodox and one becomes completely opposite. You see it all the time.
Yeah, but what you find that's common in the two of them is that they commit to something, right? Or that they're searching for something, right? They just found different things, but it's very common.
As long as they feel